today's junk journal with me, I'm going to be working on the prompt of tickets for junk journal January, and I'm actually going to be altering a train ticket that I've saved. So I don't know if you're like me, but anytime I get the train or different modes of transport, I always seem to just collect the tickets. Especially if I am like traveling and in another country, I just always find it fascinating to see all of the different tickets, and so it's something that I always collect on my way. And so I knew I had to include it within the challenge prompt list because it's such a popular thing to include within our junk journals. And so what I decided to do with my ticket is I actually altered it and used it as part of my collage almost. So normally if I was just doing like some memory keeping style journaling, I would just like tip it in to the page with some washi tape, and because the back of train tickets are normally a little bit more boring, I would put like a photo on there or something. But because I was using this in my junk journal here, that is a lot more artsy, I want to say, I decided to actually use it as a piece of ephemera and incorporate it into the collage. And so the first thing I decided to do was to add a layer of just white acrylic paint, because as you could see, there was that orange strip along both sides, which is iconic for our train tickets, but not something that I wanted for my journal page. So I needed to immediately push that back, and it also meant that I had a bit more of a base to work on in terms of adding my collage, even though, as you'll see, I did add things like over the top. And so you might think, well, why did I put the white paint on there in the first place if I was only going to cover it up? But to me, it kind of helped me just to see what I was working on. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, because it was less busy, I was just able to see where my collage would work, and also then made it easier to intentionally leave some blank spaces. So you'll see as I go throughout this video working on this collage, I was quite mindful to make sure that I didn't just cover the whole thing completely, because I did still want it to have certain bits peeking through so you could still tell that it was a ticket, even though this is something that I've essentially just like recycled and repurposed into my journal page. But I didn't want it to just be collage fodder, if that makes sense. So you'll see I did leave certain elements of the ticket that means when you do look at the final page, you can see the fact that it is actually a train ticket. So I went around the edges mostly, I'd say, with the collage, and I just had little scraps and bits and pieces of different papers. I was using like some book papers, I was using that faux washi that I'd prepped because I love the way that the coffee stained tissue on that looks on the pieces that I add it to. And so I was going back and forth as well between adding a few collage pieces and then coming back in with the white paint in a way that I think helped it to feel a little bit more cohesive, and like the papers were almost blending into the page itself, or into the ticket rather. I was treating this basically like its own mini journal page. Like at one point I did think, like, am I actually going to stick this onto the page, or am I just going to have this as something that maybe tucks into an envelope or something? Like, obviously in the prompt that I did for yesterday's video, if you saw that, I did that sort of like secret envelope page, and so I thought maybe this is the perfect size to include in that. And you'll see later on when I finish this that I did have a play around and see where it might fit within this journal. But as I was working on it here, I was just kind of treating it as its own little mini art piece, which I think was a really nice way to be working on the prompt, because there was a lot less pressure, because I was working on something that was a lot smaller. And I think it worked well because obviously the train ticket isn't that much smaller really than the journal page itself. So I was able to use the whole thing and it wouldn't look like a pimple on the page, basically. Like, it would take up a decent amount of space on the page when I added it to it. So I decided to just embrace that and work on the whole thing. And I was really enjoying the process of building up all the different layers, adding, some paint and then some wallpaper. And then I came in with some stamping to add some interest, and then I added some more papers and some more paint. And so I was just going like back and forth with the layers and building that up on this card basically. And that's what I really enjoyed about the process of creating this. Kept it quite neutral as well with the colour tones that I was using, because I did have that ever so slightly more muted orange at the bottom of the ticket, so I didn't want something that would compete with that too much and kind of look garish in terms of my journals at least. And so I wanted as well to add some more delicate interest, so I decided to add a couple of rub-on stickers, which are really great because they don't add a lot of bulk to whatever you're adding them to. And I found a couple of gaps within my collaging, even though this was getting a little bit busy. Like, I was sort of thinking, this is maybe reaching the point where I need to stop now and not add too much to it. But there were a few gaps that I thought the rub-on stickers would actually look really nice added to that section of the ticket. I think hand sewing is one of my favorite little details that I add to my journal pages because it's nothing that has to be like perfect or precise. Like I just make some like crisscrosses or some little, I want to say marks. It's almost like mark making to me, but just with my stitching. And it adds some nice texture, it adds some nice detail. For this, I just decided to go with a subtle pink. I was thinking about adding a pop of colour, but I had already added that fussy cut flower as you saw, so I didn't want to compete with that necessarily. So I just went for the subtle detail in the end, and so I think it helped just to add a bit of a finishing touch almost to it. And I added also that text, which I thought worked really nicely because it gave a bit of like blank space almost where I had it sort of around the word, and I didn't want to add too much text to it because obviously it's quite small and it was all very busy. So I wanted to keep the wording itself quite simple, and I think it kind of went with the way that I was just sort of playing and experimenting on the tag itself. So I thought it would be perfect to include on that and to have on the journal itself. And now I'm just realizing that I called it a tag, didn't I? And it's a ticket, it's a ticket. I don't know why I keep calling it a tag. I've actually had to edit out a few times where I called this a tag. So, yeah, this was the journal page that I ended up creating for the prompt of ticket. I really like the way that it ended up looking and how I added it to this tissue page. So it'll be interesting to see what I do for the reverse of this page because you can obviously see through the things that I have glued onto this. So that will be an interesting challenge, I think, to see how I end up working that into the journal page. But I hope you enjoyed joining me for this journal with me. I did add there that just final washi tape, which I think helped to add a bit of contrast to the page. And what's a journal page without washi tape anyway? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed joining me for this. Let me know what you've created for the prompt for today. I'd love to hear about your journal pages.